Hey everyone! Last time I was in Texas, I went thrifting with my little sister. We filmed that. I haven't edited it yet. But if you like hauls, then keep a lookout for it in the next few weeks. Hopefully I'll have time to edit it. Anyway, one of the things that I got was a leather jacket. Whenever I have a project that requires some leather, I typically like to go to the thrift store and buy a used leather jacket, and then I break it down into big usable pieces that I can use for whatever I want. And I figured that I could put together a video showing you guys generally how to break down a leather jacket in order to get big pieces of leather that you could use for whatever project you want. So let's get started. You'll need a leather jacket, a seam ripper, and scissors. First, I start with the sleeves. Pull the sleeve away from the body of the jacket so that you can see the thread. Using the seam ripper, carefully cut some of the thread. This will make an opening big enough for you to actually fit the whole blade of the seam ripper into the seam so that you can cut it more easily. Try to be aware of what you're cutting. When you get good at this, you can go pretty fast, but you can still accidentally get caught on the actual leather and start cutting into it, which I accidentally did in a few places. Anyway, use the seam ripper to cut the seam around the sleeve. If the jacket has a lining, then you'll need to cut it. If you want to save that fabric, you can just seam rip around the seam like you did on the outer shell of leather. But I didn't care about this fabric, it was some cheap polyester stuff, so I just used my scissors to cut it away. And then that completely detaches the sleeve. Repeat for the other sleeve. Take one of the sleeves and find the seam on the underside. It will be at this little dip of fabric right here. Use the seam ripper to cut that seam. So, the jacket that I have right here has two seams on the sleeve. One of those is just decorative. I wasn't thinking and I ended up cutting the decorative seam on accident. In my experience, the seam you want to cut will just have one row of stitches, whereas decorative stitching will have two or more stitches along the seam. I should have realized that I was cutting the wrong seam when I had to cut through two rows of stitches. Oh well. There's another sleeve, thankfully, so I can show you the correct way to do this. But before I get to that, the lining fabric needs to be cut out again. I used a seam ripper to cut the stitches around this wrist part, but you could also just use scissors to cut it off. I get impatient and end up resorting to this method later on. Here's the seam that you're supposed to cut. And once it's cut, it should look like this when you lay it out. And here's the incorrectly cut one laid out. Now, back to the body of the jacket. Find the side seams and seam rip the thread on that. Again, the seam should only have one row of stitching. Continue up onto the shoulder and to the collar. Repeat on the other side. The collar part can be a little tricky to seam rip, and it's usually just a piece of leather that's small and stretched really weird from conforming to a neck for however long it was actually a jacket, so I normally just use scissors to closely cut the leather away from the collar. Then I use my scissors to closely cut the rest of the lining fabric out. Again, you can just seam rip it if you want it to be a little cleaner, but at this point I was getting impatient, so I just used my scissors. Now you should have 5 pieces in total, 2 sleeves, the back, and the 2 panels from the front. And now you can use this leather to go make stuff. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, and if you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe. I post DIY videos every Thursday, and now I've started to post drawing/painting/art videos every Tuesday. You can follow me on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, or Pinterest, and I'll leave the information of those down below. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next week. Really, Hobbs?